Yo, yo, yo! What's up, my Magic Cat viewers? It's your boy Magic Cat, the magical cat, and I'm back ringing some Eldens. This time I want to give my overall thoughts on the game, as well as do some comparisons to the previous FromSoft games, which would be Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, 2 and 3, Bloodborne and Sekiro. I'm gonna go over one category at a time, which will be combat, build variety, enemies, areas, bosses, world and lore, music, and then I'll list some things I don't like about Elden Ring and how I'd rank the game in the full series. Now, at the time of making this video, Elden Ring doesn't have DLC yet. If one day it does, some things I say in this video might change. So let's begin! Combat in Elden Ring is Dark Souls 3 gameplay, but done right. Don't get me wrong, Dark Souls 3 is smooth as fuck, but it's got a lot of missed potential. I was never a fan of the weapon arts in particular. They're like a perfect example of a cool concept on paper, but bad execution. Each weapon would have its own weapon art. Whoa, that's cool. Except it turns out most straight swords and great swords would just have the same boring skill, and it's not even that good anyway. Especially because it doesn't flow into your R1 spam, which is really the only thing you should be doing anyway. And Elden Ring completely fixes both problems. Ashes of War is an amazing feature, I really think so. There's tons of different skills you can find out in the world, and they can be applied to several weapon types. Even if you find one that's meant to scale with faith or magic, you can still infuse it with whatever you want and make it work for your build. I love messing around with different skills and finding which ones fit my playstyle the best. Phantom Slash is fucking badass, you can roleplay as Pontiff Sullivan. Prelate Charge is fucking hilarious. Bloody Slash carried me through my first playthrough. A lot of these skills are actually worth using in combat. Unlike in Dark Souls 3, I always make sure I have at least one FP flask. Also, the whole R1 spam meta from Dark Souls 3 is toned down here. Every weapon has a combo finisher, after which you have to wait a second before you can repeat the combo. And the combo finisher is typically a new animation as well, which probably won't matter for everyone, but I never liked how most Dark Souls 3 weapons just had 2 attacks on loop. Like, compare the katana moveset from Dark Souls 3 to that of Elden Ring. I know which one I prefer, even if it is just cosmetic. And I love power stancing. Dual wielding greatswords is just glorious. I'm so glad they brought that back from Dark Souls 2. On top of that, we have mounted combat and 2 different jump attacks per weapon. I don't really care much for fighting enemies on horseback, really. I mainly use it if I don't want to have to slow down in my tracks and just quickly swat away weaker enemies. But for most field bosses, I'd rather fight on foot so I can roll. Jump attacks are great though, even if it can become kind of stupid if you're power stancing. If you have 2 big weapons and the claw talisman, why would you ever use any other attack than the jump attack? Still, I'd say Elden Ring has better combat than Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2 obviously, and Dark Souls 3. Now, is it better than Bloodborne and Sekiro gameplay? No. No, I don't think so. Bloodborne doesn't have the weapon variety of Elden Ring, but each weapon is basically 2 weapons in one. Plus, the ones you can two-hand have extended movesets with the L2s. They're not customizable like Ashes of War, but in exchange they're built to specifically fit into that weapon's moveset. And the fact that they only cost stamina means you're free to use them all you like. I also like how you can usually go from the L2s and R2s straight into R1s and kinda combos in that way. It just feels very fluid and the animations are great. It's also a lot faster gameplay and that's more my cup of tea. Which is why Sekiro is my favorite in terms of combat in the series. But it's completely different, so I can't really compare it to Elden Ring. Still, I think Elden Ring did a solid job perfecting the Dark Souls combat. I'll be honest, this one's gonna be a tough category to compare to the other games because I usually have just stuck to using either pure strength or pure dex in all the previous games. Obviously, we're gonna have to cut Sekiro out of this one. Sorry, but the different fucking prostate tools aren't enough to count as builds. But I can say this for Elden Ring. I've never before tried out this many different builds and weapons in any of the other games. And this game just came out. Faith plus strength? I feel like a fucking paladin crusader, it's awesome. I remember in Dark Souls 3 whenever I tried starting as a sorcerer or something, a couple hours in I'd just ask myself, what are you doing, man? Why am I going through all this trouble to build something that's just less convenient than a pure physical build? But in Elden Ring, I never really felt that way. I know some sorceries are broken, but honestly, in a mainly PvE focused game, I'd rather have it be overpowered than underwhelming. Sure, there's lots of people that care about PvP, but I'm not one of them. Which is why I'm not including it as a category. And with there being such a vast amount of different weapons, different Ashes of War, and the ability to infuse weapons to scale with whatever you want, as well as the nature of the open world allowing you to seek out certain weapons and talismans early, experimenting with builds is one of the most fun parts of the game to me. I know people say Dark Souls 2 has great build variety, and I'm sure they're not lying. I was just never really interested in it because the combat in general always felt off to me, so I'd rather just pick something safe and not worry about it. So based on my limited experience with different builds, I'd say it's the best in Elden Ring. Alright, so what makes for a good non-boss enemy? Well, there's lots of ways to get to that, and there's different types of enemies that have different requirements for being what they are. Fodder enemies are the type you kill in just a couple hits. They usually don't have particularly interesting mechanics, but if done right, they can add to the environment. Like, think of the snail women in Bloodborne. Then there's the mid-tier enemies who are, for example, low-ranking knights and soldiers, and then there's the strong foes that are there purely to offer a challenge. I think Elden Ring knocks it out of the park with its enemy design. Crucible Knights, I'm not sure if I should count them as enemies or bosses. They're used as both and they make sense as both, and they're great either way. The lions, on the other hand, are only used as non-boss enemies, and they're straight up some of the best beast-type enemies they've created. They're a better lion fight than Alva from Dark Souls 2, and that's no diss, I like that boss. Black Knife Assassins are also some of their best non-boss enemies, when they're visible. I love the giant crows and T-Rex dogs in Caelid. There's so many cool designs in Elden Ring, like the abductor versions, land octopuses, and the flame chariots. They're not that fun to fight against, but just the way they look and the way they're animated makes me love them regardless. FromSoft has also had years of practice making knights throughout their games, so it's no surprise that they're better than ever in Elden Ring. Sure, a lot of them are modified Lothric knights, but honestly I'm fine with it. There's such a huge variety of them that you'll quickly forget they ever existed in Dark Souls 3. Plus, they're just generally better designed. They don't leave themselves as open to backstabs, and I love that each region has its own area-themed knights. There are some enemies that I would rather not have seen come back though. I swear, the more we complain about dogs and poison swamps, the more we get them. Elden Ring has more dogs than all the other games put together, and they're probably even more annoying than ever. Thralls are also back. I don't know why. Did anyone like these things? I sure as fuck didn't. But I won't complain too much about repurposed enemies when Elden Ring has well over 60 new types of enemies. And I'm only counting like different enemy groups, not even different variations. If I did, it would go into hundreds. I'm not sure I'd say the game has the best overall enemy quality. I mean, maybe. I'd say Sekiro generally has more fun enemies to fight, and I'd also say Bloodborne does a better job creating its creepy atmosphere with the use of enemies. But generally, Elden Ring's enemies are more fun to fight than Bloodborne's, and they're way cooler design-wise than Sekiro's. So honestly, I'd say those three are about even. So Elden Ring obviously has more geography than all the prior titles, but if we wanna compare them to areas like Anor Londo, Tower of Latria, we'd have to just focus on what are called legacy dungeons. They're the big castles that you can't use your horse in that usually have a major boss at the end of it, like Leyndell, Stormvale, Haligtree, Farum Azula, etc. I was afraid at first that having a big open world would essentially replace the iconic area design we've come to know and love from the past games, or that if we did get them, there wouldn't be more than a few of them and they wouldn't be all that big and intricate. Then I stepped into Stormvale, one of the biggest areas they've ever made, with secrets around every corner. Like, holy shit, this area blew my mind. And yet, that was nothing compared to the amazement I felt when I discovered Leyndell, the royal capital. It has to be the most impressive city they've ever done. I felt Anor Londo and Ringed City are examples of ambitious ideas they had, but couldn't quite fulfill due to whatever limitations. Anor Londo is cool, but you only see the upper sections of it and they're not really that crazy. And with Ringed City, half of the area is just that big swamp. But Leyndell is as cool on paper as it is in execution. Everything you can see, you can go to. Along with the capital and Stormvale, I'd say Farum Azula is also one of the best areas they've made. I didn't expect another colossal level this late in the game, but it was a welcome sight for sure. And I'm very impressed how in a massive open world like this, with tons of enemies like we just covered, they still managed to make areas like Azula and Volcano Manor have enough of their own unique enemies with great variety. I would have expected them to just use the same assets by that point, but that's not the case. I think only Haligtree suffers a bit from that. All in all, Bloodborne probably still has the highest amount of my favorite areas. Fishing Hamlet, Research Hall, Hunter's Nightmare, Cathedral Ward, Central Yharnam, Castle Cainhurst, those are all S tier. I guess to some extent it's just the unbeatable atmosphere in Bloodborne. Sekiro levels are also very consistent. Ashina Castle is awesome. Hirada is great. Sempo is beautiful. Fountainhead is probably one of their best levels. So I hate to say it, but Elden Ring is once more tied with those two for this category. Bosses are probably the most divisive aspect of Elden Ring. Some would say too many of them rely on super delayed attacks and AoEs, and in late game unfairly high damage and other gimmicks like Melania's lifesteal or Malekith's health sap. And even more would say they find the repeated use of tree spirits, Erdtree avatars, magma worms, and many other fights to be tedious and lazy. And I think most would say that the amount of Dark Souls 2 style of gang fights is bullshit. So what would I, your boy Magicat, say about this? I think if you're a completionist, the repeat bosses are going to be a chore by the end of the game. But after first playthrough, I know which ones are worth fighting, and there's no way in hell I'm gonna kill all Erdtree boys. I don't feel like I have to. I'll basically just go for the ones I like. I'll always kill the Tree Sentinels, Crucible Knights, and Falling Star Beasts, for example. I love those fights. But I think the many duo fights are usually a chore even the first time. I think the game expects you to use spirit summons for these bosses, and it does make it far less bullshit if you do that. But is it fun? For me, no. I don't like relying on some shitty AI body who can't walk out of a poison cloud that's killing him. It's like I'm back in World of Warcraft raiding. And it's not that they can't make good duo fights. They've been doing them since Dark Souls 1. I mean, even Demon Souls kind of had the right idea with the Man-Eaters. It was clunky as fuck, but they tried. Even Dark Souls 2 had some good ones, like Dark Lurker. That fight is way better than any of the gangs in Elden Ring. And I'd say out of all their duo fights, Demon Prince is probably the best designed. This is how you do it. You make one of the bosses more passive, stay at range, and shoot shit at you, while the other one is more aggressive. In Elden Ring, it's just overlapping combos from two aggressive enemies that usually have lots of distance closing moves. But what about the main bosses like Melania, Morg, Godfrey? Well, I think all the bosses that drop remembrances are at their worst, decent, and at their best, excellent. If we only counted remembrance bosses, Elden Ring would no doubt be the most consistent work they've done. But there is a shift in design that I've noticed. On the surface, they just look like Dark Souls 3 bosses, but when it comes to how you approach them, it's totally different. In Dark Souls 3, you just dodge and punish. That's pretty much it. Most of the time the bosses have a clear end to their combo, after which you're safe to land a hit. As a result, Dark Souls 3 bosses tend to feel like a dance. Whereas Elden Ring bosses, they're a dirty brawl. They're not there to give you easy punishes, they're there to kill you. You'd usually assume that after such a long wind-up hammer slam move that Morgoth does, that you'd be given a guaranteed punish. But that's not the case here. He'll immediately follow it up with a quick combo if you're right in front of him. So you have to either memorize when the bosses can do their follow-ups or use distance and positioning to manipulate their patterns. In a lot of cases you'll have to hit bosses in the middle of their combos if you want to do any damage to them. Some people won't like that, especially if they're used to the simplicity of bosses from the prior games. Personally, I love it for the most part, although it does give quick weapons a huge advantage. As for the little gimmicks that some of the late game bosses have, I don't care too much for them. I think they mostly just make learning the fights more frustrating, but once you have learned them, they stop mattering. I don't have to worry about Melania healing herself because I rarely even get hit by her these days. But my one disappointment about the main bosses would be that they don't really have much unique cool mechanics. After Sekiro, I remember thinking, if they could combine the coolness of Dark Souls 3 bosses with fun mechanics like Father Owl flying around as a spirit owl before ambushing you, we could have some of the best bosses they've ever made. But sadly, I don't think we got much of that. Only Radahn with the summons and horse riding and Malekith with the pillar jumping feel like cool new ideas. But still, even if the bosses didn't really push the boundaries of what FromSoft is capable of creating, many of the best ones are among my favorites in the series. I think Godfrey, Melania, Morg, Morgoth, Radahn, Malekith all would appear in my top 20 favorites across the series. So if we count all bosses, including duo fights and regular enemies as bosses, Elden Ring would not have the best boss quality. But otherwise, I really think it would. Let's talk a little bit about the world of Elden Ring, and I'm not just talking about the open world aspect, but world building and lore and all that jazz. Now, I'm not a lore expert, I haven't watched any videos detailing the backstory of Olbus the Albinauric pot.
I haven't.
Instead, the ways I've uncovered bits of the story is by just playing the game, as well as word of mouth. Just speculating about some characters and events on my Discord server has given me more insight into what's going on, and honestly I really enjoy that. I think it actually helps creating a community. Prior to this, my favorite game lore-wise was Bloodborne, followed by Dark Souls 1, but I think we have a new winner. And it's not just because of the lines between being fascinating, but because the demigods and the characters are characters. They have personalities, not just one singular specific goal. Radahn doesn't speak a single line, and yet everyone loves this guy for being such a Chad. Morgoth, on the other hand, speaks lots of lines and they're all fire. His brother Morg is a fucked up creep. Godric is a pathetic slug. Rykard is Rykard.
Showing myself and king has
I want DLC for Elden Ring, not just for the new game content, but to see more of the characters. I want to know exactly what's going on with Miquella and Godwyn, for example. So what about the open world? It's something completely new to FromSoft games, and many, myself included, were a little hesitant about the idea of open world Dark Souls. But all in all, I think it's a success. I don't particularly get a kick out of just roaming around empty fields, but the fact that as soon as you enter Limgrave you're free to just go wherever the hell you want, makes this game finally surpass Dark Souls 1 in its ability to give each player a different experience. On my first playthrough I traveled to Caelid before killing Godric, whereas a friend of mine only went there after exploring mountaintops of the Giants. There were tons of secret areas, weapons and bosses I missed that he didn't, and many that I found before he did. And it was fun sharing how differently we explored the world. And the exploration is perhaps the strongest aspect of the whole game. After Sekiro, I missed the feeling of excitement in seeing loot. Most of the time the loot in that game would be just meeple balloons or upgrade materials for prosthetic tools, which weren't really all that important. But now in Elden Ring it could be a cool new weapon, a badass looking armor set, new spell, upgrade materials that matter, key items, ashes of war, etc. And I honestly think that fighting the elevator leading down into Nokron was a more memorable moment than a lot of the big cool boss fights. No other game would have the balls to hide such a massive, beautiful area underground and risk players missing out on it. However, I do think the exploration starts to get less interesting later in the game. I love Aldous Plateau, it might be my favorite of the regions, but Mount Gelmir, Mountaintops of the Giants, and Consecrated Snowfield I've never really felt like fully exploring. They mostly have reskin enemies that aren't really worth killing by that point, so I'd rather just rush through them to get to the major bosses. It's just not as cool seeing those T-Rex dogs and giant crows now as it was when I first visited Caelid. At least in earlier areas you feel a strong incentive to explore, you wanna level up and find upgrade materials, but by Mountaintops of the Giants, I'm good. I don't really need anything at that point. And generally, I just prefer the more focused experiences FromSoft makes, like Major Legacy dungeons. They're way more interesting to me than the same old ruins I see everywhere with different enemy placements. Then there's dungeons and caves and field bosses, and they're kind of a mixed bag. Again, if you're a completionist and you want to clear every dungeon and every boss, you're gonna have a bad time most likely. I got burnt out a little bit by the end of my first playthrough, but once again, knowledge is power. I know which caves I want to do. If I want upgrade materials, I'll go for the mines. If I want to get fucked in the ass, I'll go to the dungeon with the Crucible Knight duo. So honestly, I like the caves and dungeons more on replays than on my first playthrough, oddly enough. Usually it would go the other way around. So since this category is already pretty heavily tied to the replay value of the game, I might as well cover the rest of that here now. Elden Ring has the best replay value. Fight me. Don't actually, I'm fragile. And the reason I enjoyed is, well, for a lot of the things we've been talking about so far. There's so many weapons I want to try out, so many builds, so many fun areas, great bosses, and the open world gives each playthrough a different flavor. Speedrunning through areas on horseback can get a bit boring at times. I feel the map might be a little too big for its own good. But I've learned some pretty good routes to minimize travel time. Like if I want to get to Aldous Plateau ASAP, I'll travel to the start of Lunia, use the portal to teleport to Raya Lucaria, jump down and get the key, fast travel back, go down to the bottom of the academy and let the abductor version kill me with a grab. Then I'll be transported to Volcano Manor, I work my way through it, kill the boss and escape, and once I'm out, I'm already pretty much in Aldous Plateau. Sure, it takes a while even still, but it's kind of a fun adventure. I'd much rather do that than just ride straight for 15 minutes. So overall, I do think the open world is great, one of the best ones I've experienced. But I think it could be even better if they made the regions a bit more condensed. Last category I want to talk about is music, and I'll make this quick because I'm no music nerd. I just know what sounds I like, and I know I like the sounds I'm hearing when I play this game. Regions and levels usually have very ambient. It's never anything catchy, but it works well enough to set the mood, I guess. Some are actually pretty nice though, like Leyndell, Elfile, and actually Shunning Grounds. It's very moody. Open world music and combat tracks are generally forgettable to me, though I'm already a little nostalgic whenever I hear the Limgrave ambient music start playing. But boss music, especially for the major ones, is great. Morg's theme is probably one of my favorites in the series, both phases are incredible. I also love Godric's, Melania's, Godskins, Lich Dragons, and a whole bunch more. If we look at every soundtrack in every FromSoft game, Dark Souls 3 still has the highest amount of the best themes, I think. But I think Elden Ring is a solid number 2. Even if it doesn't always reach the highs of Dark Souls 3, it does have better variety, since they've brought in quite a few new composers. So, hats off to them, they did good. Now with each category covered, I probably sounded very positive overall, so let's balance it by summarizing things I like the least about the game. Number 1. Spirit Ashes make the game worse. I like them outside of boss fights where you have these specific little areas that are crowded with enemies and you're expected to summon your own little army to fight them. Like in Stormvale, the big battlefield with flaming turrets and barricades. I find that fun. Even though you're missing a tutorial for when you can summon these spirits, it's whenever you see this icon on the screen. But the Spirit Ashes absolutely suck for boss fights. It seems like they thought being able to summon NPCs whenever you want would mean they don't have to balance gang fights to be fair for solo plays, which is such a shame. Like I said before, I don't like relying on brain-dead NPCs who I can't control. At the same time, it makes me wonder if they balance solo bosses with Spirit Ashes in mind as well. The bosses are perfectly fine as one-on-one fights, but almost all of them have these mechanics that seem to be specifically designed for crowd control. Like Renala can summon her own Spirit Ashes. Godfrey, Radagon, Morg, Astel and a billion other fights have AoEs and other effects that make them more likely to hit you, even if their actual attack didn't physically touch you. I still love those fights the way they are, but I do wonder if they could have made them even better if they didn't have Spirit Ashes in mind at all. Number 2. New Game Plus is a poorly balanced piece of shit. I'm in Journey 7 and the early game is still a complete face roll. Only once you get into the mountaintops does the game start to actually pose any challenge. Godric, Morgoth, Radahn, Renala, Margit, all the early game bosses just melt. Late game fights aren't really that crazy hard either, they just do a fair bit more damage. And I really can't wrap my head around why they had to make the bell bearings reset every NG Plus cycle. It's unfortunate because NG Plus I enjoyed more than regular NG in some of their other games. In Elden Ring, if I want to replay the game, I'll most of the time just make a brand new character. Number 3, if you're a hardcore completionist, I feel really bad for you. I'm so sorry. Number 4, Miriam. Fuck you, Miriam. Number 5, Moongrim. Fuck you, Moongrim. Number 6, Crossbow Cunt in Leyndell. Fuck you, Crossbow Cunt in Leyndell. Number 7, travel time between notable landmarks is at times way too long. Number 8, the super delayed attacks. I feel a lot of the difficulty for many of the bosses and enemies comes from how long they hold their attacks. And I don't think it's really bullshit, I just don't like it. It's annoying and it doesn't feel as good as faster paced fights. That would pretty much be it for the biggest sins of the game for me. So how is Elden Ring overall? Is it one of their best games or one of their worst? I'd say it's better than Dark Souls 2. It's also probably better than Demon Souls. And better than Dark Souls 3. Also possibly better than Dark Souls 1. Perhaps better than Sekiro. But would I really say it's better than fucking Bloodborne? Yeah, I think I would. I think Elden Ring is my new favorite FromSoft game. To me, it's a celebration of many of the best aspects of the entire series. It has the unique, fascinating world of Dark Souls and Demon Souls, the adventurous feeling of Dark Souls 2, the looming outer space horrors and disturbing enemy design of Bloodborne, the fluid gameplay, orgasmic music and amazing bosses of Dark Souls 3, and for Sekiro, well, I don't really see much of Sekiro here. It's so different that many don't even really consider it part of Soulsborne. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Elden Ring. I'm sure many are going to disagree, but hey, don't worry, I'm right so that you don't have to be. Thanks for watching, I still love you.